Good evening. Welcome to this event of the Chennai International Centre. Today's event is an extremely topical one. How do we navigate the global disruptions that are happening? So, we have a very, very eminent panel today. We have Ambassador Rakesh Sood, Air Marshal Matheswaran, and Ambassador Tirumurti, who is no stranger to all of us. I have the great pleasure to introduce them before I invite them onto the stage. Ambassador Sood joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1976, serving initially in Brussels, Dakar, Geneva, and Islamabad in different capacities, and as Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington, D.C. At the ministry, he set up the Disarmament and International Security Affairs Division in the Foreign Ministry and led it for 9 years. During this period, Ambassador Sood was in charge for multilateral disarmament negotiations, CWC, CTBT, BWC, verification protocol, and CCW, bilateral dialogues with Pakistan, strategic dialogues with other countries, including the US, UK, France, and Israel. This was especially after the nuclear tests in 1998. Non proliferation related export controls and dealt with India's role in the ASEAN regional forum as part of the Look East policy. He has served as India's first ambassador and permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva and later on ambassador to Afghanistan, Nepal, and France. After retiring in 2013, Ambassador Sood was appointed Special Envoy of the Prime Minister for Disarmament and Non Proliferation. He has been writing and speaking on foreign policy, regional and global security related issues at home and abroad. He is currently Distinguished Fellow at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, a Delhi based think tank. A selection of his writings and interviews may be seen at rakeshsood.in. It's a great pleasure to invite Ambassador Sood to join us on the stage. The moderator of this session would be Air Marshal M. Madheswaran, AVSM, VM, PhD. He is a highly decorated veteran of the Indian Air Force with 39 years of distinguished service. In his final appointment, he served as Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff at the Ministry of Defense, where he was responsible for policy planning, force structuring, technology management, and acquisition strategies of the three services. A fighter pilot and test pilot, he has flown over 3,200 hours on more than 40 aircraft. He commanded a Jaguar fighter squadron, led India's prestigious aircraft and systems testing establishment, and served as Deputy Commandant of TACDE, the IAF's Fighter Weapons School. His expertise in flight testing tactics and R&D have contributed to major defense programs including the Tejas, the Kaveri engine, UAVs, LRSAM, and electronic warfare systems. He holds a PhD in defense and strategic studies, a fellowship from Harvard Kennedy School, and is an alumnus of NDC and DSSC. Post retirement, he has advised HAL, Reliance, SciNet, and FICCI in aerospace and defense. Currently, he is the founder, chairman, and president of the Peninsula Foundation, a Chennai based think tank on security, governance, and technology. He is a recipient of the Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, Vayu Seva Medal, and CAS Commendation. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Marshal, please join us on the stage. Ambassador Tirumurti was in the Foreign Service with a diplomatic career spanning 37 years between 1985 and 2022. He served as Ambassador, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations in New York between 2020 and 22. He was President of the UN Security Council for August 2021 and also Chair of 3 committees of the Council. Earlier, he was Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Ambassador Tirumurti has previously served in Cairo, Geneva, Gaza, Washington, D.C., Jakarta, and was also India's High Commissioner to Malaysia. He was India's first representative to the Palestinian Authority at Gaza. He served in various capacities in Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi, including head of the United Nations Division and head of division of 4 neighboring countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Myanmar. He was also a climate change negotiator for several years. He is currently distinguished professor in IIT Madras. He is the author of 3 books. And it's a pleasure to also introduce him as my dear friend and batchmate. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Tirumurti, for this lovely introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening and have two eminent experts and diplomats on this panel. And it's a pleasure for me to moderate this session. And as he introduced the topic, the importance of today's environment, and the global environment particularly, in terms of disruptions that we are witnessing, whether it is in geopolitical terms or whether it's in economic terms or technology terms, I think it's a significant turbulence that the world is undergoing. Uh, in terms of international relations and geopolitics, uh, we all are aware that the world or the global governance, while the UN Charter may say all countries are sovereign and equal, but there is a pecking order and the global governance dominated by the great powers. And you have a hegemon who's all powerful, the powerful military, controls the technologies and controls the economic pillars of global governance as well. But when that gets challenged, and invariably in history, you always have rising powers and systems that develop in the international order. And then you have uh, what the US says in its strategy, national security strategy, clearly is that their objective is not to let a peer competitor rise at all. But despite all that, you will have peer competitors rising and challenging the existing system. And therefore, if you look at it from a theoretical perspective, what the world is witnessing in terms of these turbulences is also a manifestation of what's known as the power transition conflict. And that power transition conflict, invariably in history, as Graham Allison famously brought out in his book, in one of his books, where he says, we must avoid falling into the Thucydides trap. But he also says very clearly, the history says, and very often the power transition ends up in a conflict. That's one. But we live in a nuclear age, in a nuclear environment. Therefore, since 1945, great powers have not gone into a conflict simply because of the nuclear environment as well. But they manifest in many other forms: economic warfare, sanctions, proxy wars. All this are manifestation of this turbulence that we witness. So you have, starting with Ukraine war, and then you have the conflicts in Middle East, the Israel's actions in Gaza, the wars in Syria and Lebanon, and of course the war in between Israel and Iran. These are all manifestations of the turbulence that we are witnessing. More importantly, we should also, in the last 3 years, we've also seen a series of coups that have dominated Western Africa. And that's the Francophile Africa, which continued to be a colonial possession indirectly dominated by the French. And these countries have all broken off from those yoke. And that is another manifestation of what's happening. So you have BRICS, which is strengthening and rising up. And you have the existing system of multilateral organizations being downsized or being neglected by the leading powers. You have globalization, which benefited many countries, including India, for a long time, being now, the leading powers are withdrawing from it and getting more protective. And Trump, with his tariff strategy, has upset the whole economic structure of the world. So we don't know where we are going to be looking at in the next few years, and particularly with action against India. So you have Farid Zakaria saying in one of his interviews that what has been assiduously built up over the last 25 years has been knocked off in one go by Trump, and therefore the laws of trust between India and US, which has been a traditional problem, will come back to haunt us again as well. So, given this kind of a global turbulence and disruptions, uh, be it political, be it security, be it technological, or in terms of in terms of dominance, fight for the world order. I think, where do we stand, or what should India be doing to navigate these turbulences? And so I'll first invite Ambassador Rakesh Sood. Uh, he will give his initial address over 15-20 minutes. Thereafter, I'll come to Ambassador Tirumurti as well. So, all yours.
Thank you. Let me first of all thank the Chennai International Centre. Let me first of all thank Chennai International Centre, Mr. Chandramouli, and for inviting me here to talk to you this evening, and also my good friends Air Marshal Matheswaran and Ambassador Tirumurti. Historically, if we look back, global orders are a relatively recent phenomenon. They didn't exist, say, 200, 300 years ago, after all, if you take human history. You had regional orders, you had empires in their own little sphere. They had an order, the Europeans, but it only started emerging with the imperialism, colonization, this imperialism and colonialism was basically practiced by the European powers. They went out, colonized large parts of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and so on. And in a sense, the seeds of some kind of an order, fair, unfair, is not really the point here, started getting established. According to me, any order requires two things, two prerequisites. One is it requires a convergence of views among the major powers of the day. Somewhere or the other, the major powers, whichever those are at that time, they need to have some kind of a convergence of views on what it is that suits both of them, or four of them, or five of them, depending on how many major powers. The second prerequisite is that they must have the ability to present the outcome of that convergence as a greater public good, as a global public good, so that there is a buy-in by the other countries. I mean, take the UN Charter. That's a case in point. After all, it represents a certain global order that came into being with the end of World War II. In fact, if you look at the global orders, you basically see their emergence after World War I. The first attempt was the League of Nations, short-lived, and then you have the global order post-World War II. Even though that order got fractured with the Cold War, but it was still an order because there were certain rules that were observed by the two superpowers of the day, namely the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, but coming back to why I say, they came together. You had the famous conference in Yalta between Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, and it was agreed that, all right, we need to have a new international organization which will prevent wars in future, etc., etc. And so an international body should be set up. And it must be democratic because the US was involved and US was opposed to colonialism and all of that. And so you had the UN General Assembly, but then they also set up a Security Council where certain countries, 5 of them, took on the role of as veto-wielding powers. Now, everybody saw that this was an unfair system. It wasn't really democratic. But it represented the convergence of views among the then major powers because they were the victors of World War II. And B, they convinced the rest of the world that it was beneficial for them to join the United Nations. So everybody went and joined the United Nations. I can take another example from the nuclear order, the famous Non-Proliferation Treaty. The negotiations on that began in 1965 after Soviet Union and the United States had come very close to crisis, which is popularly known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in 1962, which made Soviet Union and United States realize, their leaders, Kennedy and Khrushchev, realize that, look, this is something, while we have a rivalry, and there was a Cold War, raging Cold War between taking place, that we need to ensure that we put some kind of guardrails or some ways of managing this rivalry. So, one thing is that never should our soldiers come face to face. And secondly, the second realization that they got was that, you know, we need to control the spread of nuclear weapons. If more countries have nuclear weapons, then it will be that much more difficult for all of us. Now, at that time, there were 5 countries with nuclear weapons. And that's what happened. So, during the negotiations, there were lots and lots of discussions. And people said, no, no, if countries that don't have nuclear weapons are going to say that we will give up our right to have nuclear weapons, then what about these 5? And they said, no, no, we will undertake negotiations and so on and so on. And further, they said that, no, just because you give up nuclear weapons doesn't mean that you'll be deprived of the benefits of, civilian applications of nuclear science and technology. Anyway, lo and behold, this was the agreement. It represented a convergence of worldviews. Everybody could see that it wasn't exactly balanced. There were some imbalances in it. But slowly, the US, the Soviet Union, their allies, they were able to sell the virtues of the NPT to the rest of the world. And so here you have today the NPT with 191 countries as parties, and only 4 countries are not parties. I mean, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. So it is, whether we like it or not, it is a global norm. I mean, you can't deny the fact that it is not. So this is how essentially global orders come into being, fair or unfair. They represent a convergence of worldviews among the major powers. And secondly, the major powers must have the capability to be able to present that outcome as a greater global public good and sell it to the rest of the countries. Today, what has happened is that the existing global order, in so many different ways that Air Marshal Matheswaran mentioned, seems to be on shaky ground. First is the fractured geopolitics, because there are very few issues, if at all, on which the major powers of the day have a convergence of views. If we count major powers of the day being, let's say, United States, Russia, China, maybe European Union or some European countries, or EU as an actor to the extent that it is a coherent, cohesive actor, India, maybe you mentioned BRICS. I mean, BRICS itself is highly divided. But all of them, NATO is divided. So you see, wherever you see geopolitics in a highly fractured form, reflecting a absence of convergence in terms of what it is that major powers can agree to. Ukraine is a case in point. I mean, you've seen the differences within NATO, particularly after Trump has come to power. Europeans look at the Russian threat very differently. Within Europe, countries like Poland and Lithuania and Latvia look at the Russian threat with much greater worry and concern as compared to a country like Spain or Portugal. Geography makes a difference, as does history. So that is the first geopolitical fracturing. The second thing that has happened is that in terms of geoeconomics, you see also a fracturing. Because by and large, since India becomes independent, we have seen two world orders. The first was the post-World War II global order, underlined by the United Nations and by the bipolar world. We tried to find our place in it by practicing non-alignment, by trying to have good relations with both United States and Soviet Union to the extent that we could, so that we could benefit from that. And by and large, I would say we were successful because the Cold War was taking place far away from us. I mean, it was taking place in Europe, East Europe, West Europe. When the Cold War came close to our doorstep, for example, in 1971, I mean, we had to take some sides. So we signed the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty and things like that. But by and large, we maintained some kind of a non-aligned posture, trying to have good relations with both Soviet Union as well as the United States. Sometimes we were a little more successful. If we could have, if the two of them, if we had good relations or better relations with both of them compared to what they had with each other, we were all right. I mean, that's the trick of it. And then the second order that we are familiar with is the one that emerges with the breakup of the Soviet Union. That's a different order now. It's a unipolar order because there's only one superpower, as it were, or one power. And at least I would say for since 1991, for the next 15, 16 years, we have a unipolar moment. Sometime around the middle or towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century, you see the growing emergence of rivalries between Russia feeling uncomfortable with NATO expansion, China doing the 9-dash line in the South China Seas, and things like that. And US getting weakened by virtue of its own flawed decisions in Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., and the global financial crisis sparked by the subprime lending loan fallout. So this is the second. Now here again, there was no non-alignment. I mean, there are no two superpowers. So who are you non-aligned from? So obviously we use that opportunity to improve our relations with the United States while keeping our relations with Russia intact. But this particular second phase, the global order, also led to the phenomena of globalization, which benefited us because we, not that we wanted necessarily to be part of globalization, we had our own compulsions for our economic opening up in 1991. But it led us to take advantage of the globalization wave to help in our economic development process. Today, that geoeconomic order that got created with WTO, with globalization, with supply chain and globalized supply chains and all of that is being questioned. And people are talking of friendshoring or reshoring or bringing industries back. There is growing protectionism. WTO is virtually dead, and all the rest of it. Tariffs have become a preferred instrument, something which was seen as contrary to the very principles on the basis of which WTO was established, and so on. So here you suddenly have a situation where geoeconomic order is also fractured, and it's taking place roughly at the same time that the political order is being fractured. You come to a third thing that you find that in all this, if you look at the COVID-19 crisis, if you look at Gaza, if you look at Ukraine, if you look at any of these issues, and you find that the multilateral bodies that were supposed to establish rules, which had been something which was seen as the new age of multilateralism, particularly after the Cold War was over, these multilateral bodies are nowhere. I mean, the WHO Director General received enormous amount of criticism for the handling of the COVID-19 crisis. And every country was more eager to keep as many doses of vaccines for themselves and their own populations. There was no spirit of multilateralism that was visible anywhere. Then you have the technological disruption that is taking place. This began in a small way with the internet at the beginning of the 1990s. But then, as the as electronics shrunk more and more, and as the speed of data transfers increased and the cost of data transfers went down, you got the age of digital networks, where we are all living in a network centric environment. And today, with the promises that are being put forward of AI and things like that, frankly, perhaps too much is being made out of it. But at the moment, the situation is that chips have become an arena of conflict. When you've seen export controls, you saw the US putting in export controls in a very big way on export of chips. Then you had Nvidia, which was banned from exporting H100 to China, and then they came out with this H20 that was banned, and now they have just been given permission by the Trump administration on the understanding that 15% of the profit will come to the US government. Sorry? 15% of the revenue will come to the US government. So, I mean, this is an amazing way of multilateral commerce or so what I'm saying is that here you have a technology revolution. Now, whether the AI is going to be as powerful as is being made out, but currently the perception both in China as well as in the United States is that he who controls AI, and somehow it is not the same thing as, like some parallels with the nuclear thing have been drawn. But let's say if in 1945, when US was the only country to have nuclear weapons, Soviet Union only got it in 1949. Uh, Even in 1945, 46, 47, the Americans knew that the Soviets are going to get it. But it was not as if they felt that, oh, we have to prevent the Soviets from getting it. I mean, whether we bomb them or do whatever, things like that. They didn't think that, oh, if they get it, they will dominate the world, or that we will dominate the world. But with the AI chip wars, essentially today at least, the perception among many of the hardliners in Beijing and in Washington, and including some of the people in Silicon Valley, whether the hardline guys, the very libertarian ones, is that this is a race that the US cannot afford to lose, because he who has the upper hand will control the world, because it covers both economics as well as military as well as other areas. So you have the technological disruption. And then I already talked of the nuclear order, which kind of stopped. But it has come to a point where the NPT has reached the limits of its success. When something is as successful as it can be, because, as I said, there are only 4 countries outside it. So if you are at the top, where can you go? It'll only have to come down. But I mean, a lot of people. So you have to either accept the fact that there will be more proliferation. Now the question is, or you have to accept the fact that nuclear weapons will get used. One or the other. And if that is going to be the case, then how do you deal with that, or how do you prepare yourself for that, is the question. So these are some of the fractures. Now, what is happening is that all of these are taking place at roughly similar moments in time. And so there is a far greater sense of unease. which is compounded by the fact that India no longer has the luxury of distance, because it's happening with China as a major player, US as a major player in our region, conflicts taking place which directly impact us, impact our resources, impact our raw materials. We have become a globalized, far more globalized economy today as compared to what we were in 1990. And today our foreign trade is 40% of our GDP. So, you know, if you look at goods services, look at the size of the Indian diaspora and things like that, and the engagement with the diaspora. So, this is what leads us to the difficulties of what we have in terms of. So, how do we go about it? How do we go about this friend shoring? What have we tried? We backed off from the RCEP and these negotiations. So then on the rebound, we decided that we would get into bilateral FTAs with a lot of countries. Now we've had difficulties there as well. I mean, we signed one with the UK, but with the other major trading partners, we are still in difficulties. We find that we have, in our neighborhood particularly, there is a sense of unease because we adopted a certain approach vis-a-vis Pakistan. The fact is that we said that, all right, I mean, terror and talks will not go together. So there is total radio silence. There are no exchanges. SARC has been put in cold storage since 2016. The fact is, till about 2006, 2007, India counted for more. The regional trade that India had with its neighbors, ranging from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, was slight, was about the same as China's. It's somewhere around 2007-8 that China started overtaking us. In the sense that and today they have about 4 times as much trade with our neighborhood as we do. This similar story, I mean, it started, of course, in this. Pakistan plays a major role, as does Bangladesh also, their trade, and Sri Lanka. The same kind of a thing started happening with FDI, with foreign investment coming into our neighborhood. Today, China's foreign investment is even larger than India's, even in Nepal. I think Bhutan is about the only country which has, as a percentage of trade, has more trade with India, and there is more FDI from India than from China. But in the rest of the countries, and it forces us to look at our own regional approach. I mean, it was one thing for India to be able to say during the Cold War that we don't want superpowers in our backyard, in the neighborhood, in the Indian Ocean. What do you do when your own neighbor becomes a superpower? How do you say no to that? So, and how do you deal with that? So, that is another huge challenge. Are we destined to have this strategic? I mean, particularly in the last 10, 12 years, we've seen increasingly an articulation that Pakistan we can deal with, it's a minor irritant, but China is our long term strategic rival. I mean, if that is really so, then are we destined to have this long term rivalry with China? Then, in that case, we need to refashion our neighborhood policy as well. Because, I mean, one thing is there that if in your street you are not respected, then you can't be respected in the town. You can't win an election in the town. So, if you want to be a big power and you want to be a major power and sit at the table of the decision makers, then you need to be able to manage your neighborhood somewhat better. And I think I've spoken for about the requisite time. So, but these are some of the challenges that we face now. It is not just the geopolitical challenges that we have to look at. We also have to look at what we do. We have a certain demographic dividend, but the demographic dividend is not going to stay with us for all
Halfway through
times to
already.
come. So we need to be able to exploit it to be able to build up our strengths in good time. Otherwise, the demographic dividend can become a liability. So these are some of the issues where we need to now relook at our relationships. I mean, our equation with the United States, particularly from 2000 2001, from the Bush administration onwards, an underlying principle was that there was an incipient rivalry growing, which we saw, and which some of the Americans saw. I think Condoleezza Rice was one of the first to see that. The growing rivalry between US and a rising China. And without that being explicitly, we are never a military ally, but there was that a US policy that therefore strengthening India or a rising India would be not in the interests of greater balance in Asia and therefore to the benefit of the United States, which also sees itself as an Asia Pacific power. That continued. Now, therein also lies
Disruption.
a disruption. You don't really know how the US is going to deal with China. And so that non alignment approach of trying to have better relations with both, better than what they have with each other, can get challenged very easily. And these are some of the issues which we thought, with the benefit of Air Marshal Matheswaran and Ambassador Tirumurti and all of you sitting here with your ideas, because this is a fantastic audience. I don't think I could get an audience like this in Delhi. We thought we could get a good discussion going.
Thanks, Ambassador. You mentioned about norms, how the global great powers come to an agreement and then establish the norms and move across in terms of governing the world or dealing with the world. But norms are not eternal, so they do keep changing, right? And so, has in a given turbulence today and the fractured, relations between great powers, particularly Russia, China, and the US, uh, some of the norms will have to be written, including technical standards, and that's where I think China comes into play as well. For example, in 2008, the Western powers, led by European Space Agency and the US was behind it, and they pushed something called the Code of Conduct, and bringing in evolving norms in space governance, particularly in the context of rising space powers and other issues. And so India did not support that simply because we saw through it. We said, we literally called it as an NPT in another form for space governance that was coming in. Russia and China completely, vetoed it, and therefore that fell through. The objective of that code of conduct was to control emerging space powers, not give them adequate freedom, limit their freedom of being able to launch satellites and operate in space, etc. So you have the existing great powers trying to establish norms through these kind of activities, and you see that in the technology denial regimes that have been in place since 1945. But all that is now being overcome, and now standards are being likely to be rewritten with China coming into the fray at the top level of technology capabilities. The ITU has been the leading element in standardizing much of the world's technical standards, but China is questioning that. And therefore, when China is able to rewrite that part, then you have a problem between the great powers. Where does India stand? Because somewhere along this development process, we seem to have lost the boat in terms of creating those capabilities in the technology domain.
Norms is an interesting thing. And, first of all, I'll make a distinction. Let me first take the India question. India was one of the biggest critics when export controls were being introduced by the world. The history of export controls is that immediately with the Cold War, there was the East-West divide, and it was felt by the Western countries that Western technology should not flow to Soviet Union or East or whatever. And so they set up something called COCOM, which was essentially there to control the flow, possible leakages or flows, particularly of defense-related technologies to the Eastern Bloc. That's very clear. Then in 1974, when we carried out a PNE, the peaceful nuclear explosion, which shocked the world, and they said, well, how did the Indians do this? And they said, well, the Indians had a research reactor, they had spent fuel, they reprocessed, they extracted plutonium, they made that into a device and they exploded it. So their research reactor, so heavy water, where did they get? Somebody gave them technology, they built a heavy water plant. What about reprocessing and so on? So basically, they said, well, many of these technologies should be controlled. And that was the first non-proliferation related export control regime coming into being, which eventually became known as the Nuclear Suppliers Group. In the 1980s, similar approach happened with space technologies. And the MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime, came into being. We were vociferous critics of the NSG and the MTCR. There was also, by this time, there were also negotiations on biological chemical weapons, and people were realizing that, biological agents, if you start distributing them, then anybody could get their hands on viruses and so on, which would be pretty dangerous, or certain kinds of dual-use chemicals using phosphates and things which could be converted into phosphorus-based chemical weapons. And so an Australia group was set up with its list of biological and chemical, dual-use chemical agents. And then these lists kept getting expanded. So now, if you are going to work with these kind of chemicals or biological agents, then you need certain kinds of vessels. So let's control those dual-walled vessels as well. If you are going to have missiles, then you will need certain kinds of testing equipment for missiles. Let's control that testing equipment. So what I'm saying is, that's how these... there was no country which was a stronger critic. We called it technology denial regimes. Today we are members of all of those. Because, why did we become members? Because we said that though we have developed our technologies indigenously, however, our record is clean. We have never allowed these technologies to proliferate, to get into irresponsible hands. And so we didn't export them to Libya when Libya wanted nuclear technology from us, or to Iran when Iran wanted it from us. And so we said, therefore, our credentials are good. And because we wanted to be seen as responsible members of the international community, we have now ended up joining these, and we've joined all of them except for the Nuclear Suppliers Group, but we follow the guidelines of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. So we have changed. Our approach...
joined the norms there.
Yes, so what we have seen... so what I'm saying is about norms. It depends on... You stand where you sit.
Well. Yeah,
so
right.
We shifted our position, and so we accepted the non-proliferation norm because we were in turn benefiting from the special waiver of the Nuclear Suppliers Group.
in the MTCR, we suffered for 20 years because on the cryogenic
Yes,
engine,
on
the Americans pushed us by 20 years. Right?
Yes. But then the Americans at the same
Brought
time,
us back here into that.
once we joined, so today we have space-related collaboration. I mean, we just saw in the, otherwise, suppose you had not joined, I mean, would Shubhanshu would have gone on Axiom? No, I don't think so. So, the norm, how you perceive, Iran may perceive the norm differently today. At one point, they perceived the norm similarly as us.
So that actually brings me to that question of Iran. So why is Iran sticking to NPT and not walking out if they feel the nuclear capability is so vital to their survivability and sovereignty? The NPT permits that.
Well, the NPT was negotiated at a time in history in the 1960s when the dividing line between a bomb and a non-bomb was very clear. You didn't have, at that time, you didn't have these dual-use technology concepts. And that is why, that came about, as I said, after we did the PNE in 1974. That began the non-proliferation related export controls. So what Iran is saying is that, look, the NPT says, I accept safeguards. It doesn't say I can't enrich. I need enriched uranium as fuel for my nuclear power plants at Bushehr or other plants that I may plan to have. Why should I not be able to enrich? Now, the rest of the world says, no, 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 we suspect you. We suspect your intentions. Um, uh, if you have the mote in the eye is something about which nothing can be done. But which is the reason why Iran also in its neighborhood, because it is seen as a suspect and because it has engaged in certain regional activities, whatever, through its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., etc., that it doesn't have that credibility, even though it had accepted the JCPOA and under the JCPOA had subjected itself voluntarily to a hugely intrusive inspection regime, more so than what the NPT demanded, because it had to prove its credentials. But then Trump in his first term walked out of it, deepening the mistrust. And so what you are seeing is that growing mistrust, essentially. So tomorrow, I mean, my personal, I mean, I'll let Thiru talk about this because he's also been in that region. But my personal feeling is that if we see with the recent Israel, Iran, and also the US having used its own air power to bomb some of the Iranian facilities, my guess is that the clergy, the Ayatollahs, may have been weakened a little bit more than the IRGC. And tomorrow, so far, the Iranian position has been that the Ayatollah has said that nuclear weapons are contrary to the tenets of Islam. And so, therefore, they are not permitted. But I think that tomorrow, the IRGC, if it does make up its mind, then I think they will just go for it. In fact, they will take the call and not the clergy any longer.
In fact, taking from there, Ambassador Tirumurti, so we maintained a studied neutral stance in the Israel-Iran conflict as well as Israel's actions in Gaza. And given the fact that we are so energy dependent on the Gulf, and again, we buckled under American pressure by stopping import from Iran, but our relations go as a civilizational, two civilizations having long relations over thousands of years. So, where do you think our approach will now evolve, given that Iran has actually fought quite well against Israel in that situation, and given the position that what the new developments that are taking place, how do you think we can actually, is our position stand that we've taken, is it correct, or is it a weak position?
No, I think I think our position goes beyond Iran. The type of positions we are taking actually goes beyond Iran. See, if you look at the geopolitical conflicts, whether it is Ukraine or the Middle East or the current spat between Israel and Iran, India is nowhere there. We abstained on the resolution on Ukraine right from the beginning, but I think it is absolutely the correct decision we took. I have no doubt about it. But in the last 3 years, we have not engaged with the conflict. You look at Middle East, as you correctly said, we have a lot of assets in the Middle East, we have a lot of interest, but we have not engaged with the Gaza war. We have not engaged with the what is happening in Lebanon, what happened in Syria and others. If you look at Iran and Israel, as you correctly said, we have a lot of stake in Iran. We have
Absolutely.
old relations, not just relations. We have a Chabahar port, which we are because we want access to the Central Asia and others.
Not so
But we are not engaged with the conflict at all. So India has basically not engaged with any of the conflicts, which are the major conflicts going on. And when I mean engagement, I'm not talking about mediation, because I'm looking engagement more in the context of what we saw during the Korean War. Not I don't think many of you will recall this, but in 1951-52, when the Korean War was happening, we were just 4 years after our independence. We were a fairly impoverished nation at the time, but at the time we played a very important role, not as a mediator, but person who as a country which engaged with the conflict very closely. So when the armistice agreement was signed, India became the chair of what is called the Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee.
That's true.
The 5-member committee. India was actually the chair, and both sides accepted India as the chair. So why I'm mentioning is that I think, and why should we engage? I mean, that's a very fundamental question we need. The reason is very simple. You have seen this during the attack on Pahalgam and also Operation Sindoor. You realize that your strategic partners, none of them came out to condemn Pakistan. They, of course, were supported you and condemned terrorism. But when the whole world knows that Pakistan, you have got practically 50% of all the UN sanctioned terrorists are all living in Pakistan, they did not come out to condemn Pakistan except one or two. Now, that is a clear indicator of the fact that we not just lost the narrative, but we need to do something a bit more.
More active.
In the sense that if you do not get engaged with conflicts and around the world, then it will be very difficult for you to get support from your partners for the conflicts which you have.
That's true.
So I think that is an important lesson I think we should take back. And so therefore, when you look at...
We've always been like, except for probably Korea, we've always been like that. I mean, we've not been very active.
No, this is exactly the point. See, many people, analysts now say that, please focus on your economy, put your head down. And if you start getting embroiled with conflicts, your economy will suffer. And therefore, you will have to... Now, that template is broken. As Ambassador Sood just mentioned, that template is broken now. This is a world where we are facing is fragmentation, we are facing coercion, we are facing protectionism, we are facing threats. And it is not a world which is looking at WTO norms, free trade, MFN, all that is over.
Absolutely.
So, therefore, in order to get your economic trajectory right, your technology trajectory right, you need to get your geopolitics right.
Absolutely.
So that is where exactly the change I think is going. So therefore, you need to now change your template, change it to a geopolitical aspect, and therefore it's not just about saying that I'll focus on becoming the fourth largest, the third largest. I mean, these things won't happen.
We got to be
Absolutely.
Engaged. So in that context,
one more thing I'll add to this is that if you recall, immediately after Pahalgam, we had a lot of sympathy. I mean, everybody condemned terrorism, whether they condemned Pakistan or not,
Yes.
as Ambassador Tirumurti said, that's correct. But everybody condemned terrorism universally. So there was that sense of sympathy. Now, we, on 6th, 7th night, when the first strikes took place of May, 6th, 7th of May, so about 2 weeks later, there is a second sentiment that comes in, which is now these two countries are, firing missiles at each other, drones, loitering munitions, airstrikes, whatever that we were doing, and Pakistan was responding. How does this stop? And that sentiment of that here is something that could get out of hand also starts coming in, and that takes precedence. After all, if President Trump has said
Escalation
whatever
control.
28 times or 30 times, I don't know, I've lost count, that you know, but at that time, if you recall, he was not the well, he is now claimed credit for it, that's different, but there were many other countries that were making calls for restraint, as it were. I mean, that condemnation of terrorism had happened 2 weeks earlier, but the prevailing sentiment was of trying to urge a kind of a climb
Cooling
down,
down.
of cooling down, because where do you go? So when we started the military action, I mean, this is the point. You have to have an idea as to what is the military objective. I mean, was it to inflict punishment of the kind that Pakistan would never again do something like this? Did we have that as an objective? Or was it something else or whatever? But, because I think the world sees things in its own fashion.
Differently. Yeah.
And I think that is something which we should keep in mind.
And the objectives have to be practical as well. So, in that context, I think for both of you, did we prematurely stop the Op Sindoor?
I mean, now, if we believe what President Trump has said, he, but then, okay, so then comes the issue, all right, Op Sindoor. So we did Op Sindoor, and we haven't stopped it. It's supposed to be on pause, according to the government statement, which frankly, I don't understand what it means that it is on pause, but still. But we have bombed Bhavalpur and Muridke and various other terrorist camps. Does it mean that the Pakistan military can't rebuild it? Will we bomb it again? And they'll rebuild it. So, I mean, have we inflicted the kind of punishment that they will now cut their ties with all these terrorist groups that are there? Frankly, if you ask me, and I've served in Pakistan, and I mean, I don't know what Mr. Narayanan feels, but I don't think we have inflicted that kind of punishment on the Pakistan military that they will say, no, 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 now we are cutting our ties with these fellows. So you can enforce deterrence by denial
Or by punishment.
or by punishment, or by punishment. I mean, one is, of course, so if you look at deterrence by denial, now let me take a hypothetical counterfactual. Let us say if we had prior intelligence, maybe not very precise, maybe some indicators, something, if we had stepped up whatever security precautions, if our response team after the firing began could have gotten there faster, if, let us say, out of the 4 guys, 2 guys had been neutralized, if instead of 20 plus people getting killed, the number of casualties was 4, and the nature of the attack would have been very different. Your deterrence by denial is not necessarily 100% denial, but it would have changed the nature of the way you perceived that terrorist attack, presumably.
That's true.
So you have to strengthen both, deterrence by denial, but you also have to accept that deterrence by punishment has a finite limit. Because I personally, if you ask me, I don't think we've been to war with Pakistan a number of times, and I think the most decisive one was in 1971 when they lost half their country. And that could have changed Pakistani politics for all times to come, but it didn't. It reverted back to type. I don't think personally that we can militarily impose a change on Pakistan. If that change has to come, it has to come from within themselves. We can't do it. And if we can't do it and the military is going to play a dominant role, then the military is, for the sake of its own domestic politics, a hostile relationship with India serves it. So therefore, it is something that we have to live with. So then we have to accept that there are limits to deterrence by punishment. So what pragmatism would demand that you strengthen your deterrence by denial.
That's true. Want to add something?
No, I'm fine.
I think let me open out to the audience. I think we've had an excellent session. So please, questions from the audience, anyone?
Good evening. You mentioned not engaging with Pakistan. How come we had retained the MFN status, the most favored nation status, right up to 2019? Isn't that a little difficult to understand?
Frankly, there were talks on the MFN, but then the talks got screwed up by how does most favored nation translate into Urdu, and it became translated into Urdu as "Sabse Pasandida Mulk." I mean, I don't know if all of you understand "Sabse Pasandida Mulk." So in the Pakistani parliament, there was this huge churning as to how can, we call India Sabse Pasandida Mulk, not realizing that MFN is a basic principle of foreign trade and no great shakes. I mean, if you can have SAFTA, which is the South Asian Free Trade Agreement, surely you can have MFN. Now, having said that, I mean, I don't know if that is true, but I am told by, and there are more knowledgeable people sitting in the audience here, but I'm told that apparently there was a move that Pakistan would move forward on something like this, but then it was felt that now was not the politically opportune moment, and it would be another regime change. With that, there would be a politically more opportune moment, and so it was kind of shelved, but that politically opportune moment never came. So eventually, we had continued with it, and then we finished with it. They were supposed to respond
No.
positively.
My question is, we as a nation
I know.
said no talks when you have terrorism.
Yeah, but
How did we then retain the MFN status
but there is no
for a
trade also. Trade and talks
for
also
a
don't.
terrorist state?
I know, but there is no trade that goes with it. Trade is also stopped. So whether, by definition, whether you have MFN status to them, it's a pure theoretical concept. I mean, there's no trade between India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. I'm Adil Beg. I teach international relations for civil service aspirants. I'm an avid reader of both of your articles in Hindu. So keep writing, sir. It is very useful for us. So my question is, let's come to India's foreign policy perspective amidst this entire churn of this disruptions. So how this tariff saga is going to go in the future? That is one perspective. And what is going to be the impact, sir? So one of your both of your writing, we could see one thing is India has not been in such a situation ever in the past. Last we had such a situation was before 2000s, in the Cold War era. So how our India-US relationship is going to go in future with all this tariff saga and this Ukraine war and Russia cutting off the oil and all these things.
We'll take a couple of more questions also. About 3 questions. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is to Ambassador Tirumurti. You mentioned about India should have engaged with the ongoing conflicts. But what exactly did you mean by engage? How can we engage without being perceived as taking sides?
Okay. One more. Just pass the mic here, please.
So there's one here.
Thank you very much. It's a great understanding. But my concern actually is that where is the constituency of peace? Are there harbingers of peace? Or do you think the inevitability of actions that you see in the global disruption would lead actually to more
Conflict.
harm to civilization, even the end of civilization? Or do you think that these institutions which are now broken down, I won't say completely collapsed, have a chance of revival? Are recently I was in Europe and traveling in taxis here and there, meeting a lot of common people. One of the sentiment that I came across was all our taxes, they are heavily taxed, by the way. They feel are going towards the Ukraine war. There is a disenchantment towards war. How much of the constituency of peace is actually organized or aggregated into defenders of peace? Are there any such institutions? Can we ever build it? Or is it only going to be the elite economic and technological controllers who are going to determine war and peace in this century? I mean, I'm just asking as a matter of
Yeah.
concern.
So one more question.
No, we'll take three is fine.
3 is fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Then after
Sir.
that, we can.
Okay. First one. Tariff.
No, tariff. See, uh, the first part of tariffs, the 25%, and that was announced, we thought we had gotten off to a good start because Prime Minister Modi was there in February, and some positive signs were given on Harley Davidson and things like that, even when he went there. And then he said we want to increase our trade with the US by 2030 to 500 billion, which is more than double of what it is today. And so we want to start trade talks, and so that all of that was welcomed. So we thought we'd gotten off to a good beginning, and also building up on the Howdy Modi, from his first term, and Namaste Trump and Ahmedabad and all of that. But then somewhere we forgot that tariff is a very dear word for Mr. Trump. So to kind of, since our own negotiating style is slow, and we had 5 rounds. If we had come to an agreement within 2 rounds, perhaps the 25% wouldn't have happened. But then we have our own compulsions, so we didn't. I'm not a trade expert, so I'm not saying that whether we could have or could not have. But basically, Trump, patience is not one of his virtues. Let's put it like this. So he sort of pushed that 25% and said, all right. The second 25% was not so much unhappiness at us. That was a little bit unhappiness at us. But greater unhappiness was because he was getting angry with Putin for, he made a couple of statements saying, he's not responding positively. He says, but he doesn't mean it. He promises, and so basically it was secondary sanctions on Russian oil sales. And in that we got targeted with another 25%. The Chinese also would have been targeted, except that the Chinese are doing their balancing act with the quid pro quo and things like that. So they've got a 90-day waiver. We'll see what happens with that. But if we just step back from this tariff thing, the fact is, I think, I don't know how many of you, most people from the world of business and industry do feel that we need reforms. I mean, I think what happens is that due to various compulsions, uh, these reforms only take place when we are under pressure. We can go back to 1991. There are various economists who've written on the history of reforms. Reforms are not an easy thing to manage in a diverse society with multiple interests and things like that. And you need, and with growing domestic political polarization, it becomes even more difficult. And so that's one side of it. The second side of it is that I pose this question that are we destined to look at China as a strategic rival? And if the answer is yes, then it's very clear, then we have to look at where our national interests are. Then obviously we will have to improve our relations with the United States and the West and Russia. That much should be clear to us. And if we have to do that, so one is that we also need to get away from you need to have your policy guided by interests rather than, I know today in the social media driven age there is a lot of focus on personality and all of that. But after all, we started improving our relations with the United States with the end of the Cold War. The first meeting that took place was in 1992 between Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and the then President George H.W. Bush. This was in New York on the margins of the UN Security Council on 31st of January 1992. Then you had Clinton coming in. And then you had a change of government and you had Vajpayee and Clinton. And they met. Clinton came to India, Vajpayee went to Washington. But I mean, there was good personal this thing, but we didn't allow but the relationship still remained driven by interests. I mean, today there is a sense that it's personalities that are driving the relationship. And I think and so if personalities are driving the relationship, then if there is a misunderstanding, then personality should be able to pick up the phone and sort it out. That doesn't really happen between countries. So I think part of it is also we have allowed the narrative in some fashion to get driven. I mean, Dr. Manmohan Singh and Bush concluded the India-US nuclear deal. They had good relationship with each other. Good relationship among the leaders, between the leaders, can add to the interest-based diplomatic negotiation-led process in a big way. I'm not denying the importance of that. But it cannot exist without the interests and without the negotiations.
So that second question.
Yeah, the second question. See, when the Ukraine war broke out, then within a week or 10 days, and I had written about it, so I can say that here, the Secretary General called me, the UN Secretary General, and he said that, we have Europeans who refuse to engage with, Russia and China, and Russia basically. China is seen as very close to Putin because they just signed within, I think, a month and a half earlier that so-called unlimited, friendship pact which they had. So if you look at it, the only credible country which is big, which has credibility, is India. So we would request India to have a dialogue or open a dialogue with President Putin because he refused to take my call. The Secretary General's call. He doesn't take any calls from Europe. In any case, they are not willing to speak. And China is seen very close to them. So why can't India take it up? The fact is, Prime Minister took it up. And he called immediately President Putin and he called. So there was some activity. The point is, that was a point which gave us a tremendous opening to play the same role which we played. And we were in the Security Council, by the way, and exactly in the Korean War, we were in the Security Council 1951-52. And therefore, that would have been a time for us to say that yes, we will abstain on the votes because we have a different perspective, and but at the same time, we are not going to be distant from the conflict. We will stay engaged with the conflict, and that would have helped us to get an image which is slightly different from what we have now. Right now, the image is that we are taking care of our own interests by importing Russian oil. And that's what we are looking at. Because we keep talking about realpolitik. What is realpolitik? It basically says that, you place not just 100% focus on national interest, which frankly, even if you are value-based politics, it still places focus on national interests. But it is something which we are trying to do irrespective of what the situation is. We want to make sure that we have this oil and other things. So it puts us in a different light. We can do the same thing. Nobody stops us from doing it. But we could do it with a greater sense of engagement with the conflict. And we could have gone that much more. Similarly, I would say both with, we have a position on Palestine. We are strongly supportive of a two-state solution. Secondly, what is happening there is not acceptable. I mean, let us face it. I mean, whatever may be the geopolitics of the issue and where people stand on these issues, there is a very serious human tragedy unfolding. And therefore, it is important for big countries. And finally, if India wants to be a pole in a multipolar world, you have to take certain leadership of issues. And that comes only with engagement. That does not come by staying on the margins. So this is what I basically meant, that we need to take that type of stand. And, it's just that if you have a friend who is very dear to you, there's nothing wrong in telling them that please don't do it. We have to be very careful. I'm not suggesting that you get into a confrontation with a friend, but I'm just saying there are ways and means of doing it. And that's what diplomats are for. If, otherwise we lose our job.
In fact, that answers your peace constituency as well. Right? Yeah. So we'll just go for a last round of 3 questions. We are running out of time. So,
good evening, sir.
Yeah.
My question is for Tirumurti, sir. Sir, as you said that during Korean War, India engaged with conflict. What are the reasons or the factors that India is not engaging with the conflicts in global stance today?
Repeat the same question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Second.
Hi sir, myself Indu. My question for Tirumurti sir, what is the future of two-state solution? What will be the future of Palestine? How this war will turn Israel-Palestine issue?
And one more.
Where are you from?
Sir, I'm a UPSC aspirant. I'm coming from Kingmaker.
Okay, good to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir.
We are, our editorials are always teaching both of editorials on every week of Sunday.
Yeah, but don't follow it too strictly.
So it's so much helpful for mains answer writing, sir. What will we do?
Thank you.
He now is also going to talk like an astrologer in order to tell you the future of Palestine and the two-state solution.
So it will be so helpful for our mains answer writing, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Third question.
Good evening, sir. I just would like to talk a little bit about the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty. Don't you think that is much more a greater weapon for breaking Pakistan than putting bombs in them?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just take
One last one.
No, I'll take the first 2 questions. Then he can. I'll come back. I mean, we can always. I'll just have a quick answer. See, when you talk about how do you, get involved in geopolitics, I think that's what you were mentioning. The thing is that it depends on each conflict. For example, let's take the Palestinian issue since he had also raised it. In the if you look at the Arab Gulf countries particularly, the Gulf countries are not engaging with the Palestinian issue. If they wanted to put pressure on the United States or Israel, they would have done it 1.5 years ago. But for them, the bigger issue was Iran. So they focused on their priority, which is to make sure that Iran is weakened, because they were all afraid of Iran. So, and the proxies of Iran, whether it's Hezbollah or it's Houthis or Hamas, and even, for example, President Assad of Syria, he was one of the conduits for Hezbollah strengthening. So they actually waited for all these so-called proxies or non-state actors and others to weaken. So it was weakening of Iran and weakening of these uh, forces. And after that, they also have, they're keen on normalizing with Israel. That's why they signed the so-called Abraham Accords. And Abraham Accord did not have a single line about Palestine. I mean, they had a single line, but there was nothing there about Palestine issue at all. And they wanted normalize. So they are going in a different trajectory. They just rolled out the red carpet for President Trump, and in the midst of a huge humane tragedy. So therefore, each issue has its own dynamics. So that is where a position which India doesn't have to be more proactive than the Gulf countries. That is probably one of the logic which we are saying. If they are not interested, why are we getting involved? Yes, there is definitely a logic in this. But India's interests do not necessarily coincide with the Gulf on this issue. We have our interests. And that is important for us to articulate our interests. And that's why. So each geopolitical, so getting involved is one thing. Coming to the Palestinian issue, I think I'll just sort of put it in a nutshell. I think not only is the Gaza war happening, but I think the Palestinians, the so-called far right, ministers have very clearly said that 2025 is going to be the year of Judea and Samaria. Now, Judea and Samaria is another term, a biblical term, which the Israelis use for West Bank. So, I have sort of, done the astrology on this, and and my astrologer's sort of sense says that they will, when they say something like this and repeat it more than once, they are very determined to make West Bank part of Israel. So they may well take the step to annex West Bank to Israel, and they are already doing this in a sense that they are now evicting the Palestinian villagers from their villages. Their livelihood is getting this thing. They are going so, and they have also increased their settlement size by 10 to 15% more, which means they pass an act, and even the UN has recognized all settlements are illegal, but they are increasing it. So in a way, there is a change which is getting on in the West Bank. And in Gaza, of course, you now have various restrictive policies coming in. And I've written also recently that it's ironic that Jews are putting the non-Jews in a ghetto in Gaza, and that's what they have called for. They call it the humanitarian city. So I think these are serious issues. So if you change the realities on the ground, you make a two-state solution impossible. So that is what it is going towards.
Well, the Indus Water Treaty, you're right, but the Indus Water Treaty will require a lot of time. Right now, we have put it in abeyance. Now, as far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned, the three lower rivers, which is Satluj, Chenab, and Beas, they come to us, and the three northern rivers, they go to Pakistan. So Satluj, Ravi, and Beas. So Chenab, Jhelum go to and Indus, they go to Pakistan. There, what we are entitled to broadly is non-consumptive use. So you can have run of the river and that kind of thing, dams and so on. If they don't like the shape of that dam, they can raise questions. You can have consultations. If consultations are not satisfactory, then you have two other options. One is appointment of a neutral expert, somebody from a third country who's seen acceptable as a neutral expert who can judge whether this is a consumptive use or a non-consumptive use. See, they can't question us as to what we do with regard to our three rivers. We have all the rights to use the waters in those three rivers as we deem fit for whatever purposes that we want to. It is the dispute arises with the non-consumptive use of essentially on Jhelum and Chenab. So if they say, well, no, this may be consumptive use, so then one option, as I said, is you can have discussions between the two of you. That doesn't work. You can get a neutral expert. That doesn't work, you can go for a court of arbitration. Now, our bilateral talks of the Indus waters have not been held since 2022. Okay. Now, on two of the projects, there were concerns. We asked for a neutral expert, so the World Bank appointed a neutral expert. Pakistan asked for a court of arbitration, and its stupidity, I would call it stupidity. The World Bank also provided a court of arbitration. Now, I mean, it is logical when we point out that, look, if the two processes give rise to two contradictory judgments, then what the hell happens? When it doesn't make sense. But anyway, we dissociated ourselves from the court of arbitration proceedings, and now we've also, since 2023 or 24, we've also said we want the Indus Water Treaty amended. Now, on that, there is radio silence from Pakistan. So now we put it in abeyance. If we are going to construct consumptive uses projects, it will take a fair bit of time, effort. It can't just happen overnight, first and foremost. So far, we are not fully utilizing up to 100%, shall I say, the three rivers, the three southern rivers to which we have full entitlement. Still, if we want to poke Pakistan in the eye by doing something, we can. But right now, putting it in abeyance means that we have stopped sharing data, which means that the monsoon flows on which Pakistani agriculture, in terms of how much water is flowing down for sowing and transplanting and stuff like that, is dependent, that they are now, unless they get satellite imagery from other sources, I don't know, and if whether it can compensate for the actual volume flows data that we were sharing under the Indus Water Treaty mechanism, whether it compensates or not. But that is basically the damage. But meanwhile, do remember that even if we do, even if we try to take water out of Jhelum, Chenab for consumptive uses, a large part of these rivers flows in Pakistan. So they are also rainwater fed rivers. More than 40% of the water flows in these rivers come from rainwater. Not all the flows in the river come from the snow-fed. Snow-fed is there, but a large part of it is monsoon-fed. So this is where Pakistan's own, and for that matter, even for India, storage, rainwater harvesting and proper storage of rainwater is something on which we have been extremely negligent, and Pakistan is even more negligent. So if they want to repair that damage, then they have to also put their own house in order to a great extent.
Thank
I
you,
think
Ambassador. So we've
he's waiting.
I'll keep it very short.
we've just
Well,
overshot the time.
No, he's waiting. Yeah.
No, it's just a very basic question. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so my question is with regard to: is there a chance for us to evolve a system of dispute resolution, an independent forum? I mean, of course, we have the International Court of Justice, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which have had some hits but many misses. We just rejected the PCA's award because it was, as Sir mentioned, a very foolhardy decision. But at the same time, the PCA had rejected China's claim over the 9-dash line, and we've had certain decisions that have been in favor of our interests, but again, not in our favor. But the point is that will there be a time when we can come together and find a formal forum for resolving international disputes instead of it being bilateral or multilateral, and or rather being in a state of a limbo where there are no norms or rules or a legal order per se?
You're talking about the Philippines thing, no?
Yeah.
That came under UNCLOS, not PCA.
UNCLOS.
Right.
So
the
Yeah,
tribunal.
so
for
in
the-
UNCLOS, one party can unilaterally invoke the settlement mechanism.
Right.
That is why Philippines could unilaterally invoke the settlement mechanism, and China, whether they contested or not, you have the tribunal of five, I think normally, they have every right to rule on it. Bangladesh invoked the same mechanism with India, but India also engaged on that, and we engaged very constructively. And former NSA knows exactly how the whole thing went. It went off well, and contrary to what China did, which refused, India accepted, and we implemented it. So therefore, that I think it's a good model. But at the same time, I mean, I'll of course ask Ambassador Sood to respond. But it also goes to the very root of sovereignty of countries
Right.
to be subjected. So therefore, it is something we should not discount ICJ and the International Court of Criminal Court, because at the end of the day, they are the best models which you can project with countries coming together and agreeing to. And so therefore it's important models in themselves. And right now you've just seen ICJ give a judgment on climate change.
Yes, right. Yes.
Yeah, that's so.
And also on the Middle East.
On the Middle East.
No,
the south.
exactly. In fact,
crimes.
they've actually defined, that is a very important one.
Right.
They actually defined the contours of a Palestinian state. It's a very, very important decision. So apart from Security Council resolutions 2422 and 338 and a whole lot of others, you now actually have the International Court of Justice saying that the 1967 border is the Palestinian state.
Right.
So you're looking more, I think, in the context of people implementing it.
Enforcing them, exactly.
Enforcing. No, you can't have international police. It's not. We just haven't come to that. But they are very, very important.
Right.
We cannot just can't ignore it and move on as if and pretend it doesn't exist. Sir. I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just close the issues. Before we close, I just want to add one point to the question with respect to American tariffs somebody asked. I think in the longer run, its economic interest is extremely important. The Americans are very, very particular about gaining control of India's defense market and the agriculture market. And if you notice during Prime Minister's visit in February and Trump making that statement, we are going to make billions of dollars worth of business in the defense, and we are going to sell the F-35, etc. But India moves very slowly. Notwithstanding that, between 2007 and 2025, we've given them $25 billion worth of business. That's massive. And given India's aspirations and focus on technology access, the Americans don't give you technology access. All of this business has been off the shelf, beneficial to them. And therefore, the engine contract is yet to be signed on the 414 engine. And the problem and the sticky point is the technology access issues. So I think if you notice also when the Ukraine war started, they wanted us to cut off from Russia completely on the defense business. And you would have had the Assistant Secretary of Commerce coming and saying, you must break away from Russia, otherwise there will be consequences. These kind of statements the Americans regularly make. So their focus has been on this. And therefore, you can link up all this tariff and other strategies to put pressure on India. I just want to bring in that into this entire thing. It's been a great pleasure sharing this panel discussion, and I thank
you,
Ambassador Sood and Ambassador Tirumurti for this excellent articulation. And please give them a big hand. Thank you. Chandramali, all yours.
Just one word of caution. UPSC candidates, in UPSC, they will not like this type of a discussion. You stick to your books, what they say, and please get from, it's good to have a perspective. And even in the interview, when you go to the interviews, be very careful when you articulate some of our views.
We are retired, so we have the luxury to.
That is exactly. That is exactly why CIC is what it is. 2 weeks ago, we had an event on the Op Sindoor. And there too, we had no chest thumping, no, sloganeering, but very, very sedate discussions on the various points. And today's was outstanding in setting the perspective, the wide canvas that all the speakers covered. I think you'll take away many pointers from this event. And I do encourage all of you to attend more of our events. Thank you very much. First to the moderator for having conducted the session so well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our two ambassadors, Ambassador Sood and Ambassador Tirumurti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you taking off your time, your busy schedule to be here with us and share your views. And we hope to see you more often on our platform.
Thank you.
Just some more announcements about the next few events. On 27th, we have the former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. T S Tirumurti, here talking about Beyond the Ballot, which is his latest book. And I'm sure many of you will be interested in this topic. On the 6th of September, we have a discussion on the Kiradi, which again, we had one perspective a few months ago from Matheswaran Kalaiselvan. And today we have the other perspective from two speakers, Ramesh and Shivanandam, who will give us the government's perspective on the Kiradi excavations and all the other controversies and issues which surround that. And on the 13th of September, we have a very famous Tamil writer, editor, journalist, Mr. Malan. He's talking to us on Patrigayalar Bharadiyar. I think many of you will be interested in knowing the views of how Bharadiyar functioned as a journalist. I think this is a new perspective which he'll bring. So I invite all of you to be here for these events too. So we end the session with another round of applause, please, for our eminent panel. And thank you very much once again.